Welcome to Hot Topics in Computing at MIT. I'm Dan Huttenlocher, the Dean of the Schwarzman College of Computing. We're really delighted to have Brad Smith, the President and also the Chief Legal Officer at Microsoft. While many of us see technology as a double-edged sword, as technologists, we often tend to see the opportunity and the potential for good in new technologies, maybe blinding us to the other edge of the sword. Brad really stands out in his ability to articulate the balance of positive and negative impacts from technologies and how to get better outcomes overall from understanding and addressing these in advance. He's really transformed how Microsoft and much of the tech industry see computing technology. Growing out of the Department of Justice actions against Microsoft in the 1990s, he began framing the challenges as well as the opportunities of new technologies in ways that technology leaders could appreciate. He successfully brought Bill Gates, one of the great technology leaders of the 20th century, on this journey. And I would say instilling in him and the company the important roles of many societal and government actors as we think about technology. I think that we have a lot to learn from Brad. Well, I know that we're going to learn a lot in today's fireside chat. I also really highly recommend his recent book, Tools and Weapons. It has compelling, even I would say, page-turning vignettes, each of which makes deeper and important points about technology and its positive and negative impacts. We have about 250 questions that participants submitted in advance. We'll be getting to some of the more frequent ones of those, and you can also enter questions at the bottom of your screen. Brad is going to be joined by Daniela Rus in this fireside chat. She's the Deputy Dean of Academics here in the Schwarzman College and the Director of CSAIL. I'm sure we're in for a great conversation. Daniela and Brad.
Thank you, Dan. We are so excited to welcome Brad Smith to our virtual campus today. Our teams first discussed this event in the winter, and this feels so long ago by now. Because Brad, there's been so much happening in these past few months that has had a big imprint on technology. So I'm really eager to get into this conversation. We have many MIT students with us today, and they submitted over 200 questions. So let's get started. Now, first, I saw that your CEO, Satya Nadella, said that Microsoft has seen 2 years worth of digital transformation in 2 months. And all sorts of organizations are working on COVID-related research. I'd like to start by asking you, what do you view as the biggest challenges Microsoft has faced so far, and what lessons have you learned?
Well, first, thank you, Daniela. Thank you, Dan, and thanks to everybody for watching this. I do want to just open by saying how much we at Microsoft appreciate the opportunity to work with all of you at MIT. And frankly, how much we learn from working with all of you. It's such an important relationship and partnership for us. Eric Horvitz leads a lot of the work here to work with you all, and including on the issues that we'll be talking about today around trustworthy and ethical artificial intelligence and other technology. But I do think, look, let's start with the obvious. This is a time unlike any in our lifetime. You literally have to go back 102 years to find a pandemic that has had the reach that COVID-19 has. I think it's interesting to think about how different the world's response is in the year 2020, not just compared to 1918, but just imagine if this had happened in 2010 or 2005. In so many ways, the world has gone digital, and this event itself, I think, really illustrates that. Interestingly for us at Microsoft, having our own people work from home has not been that difficult. Trevor Noah joked with me, we worked together on a number of things that we were sort of practicing for this every day just by being Microsoft, by developing this technology that we use every day. But our role throughout this has really been to support all of the other organizations and institutions, governments, nonprofits, businesses, literally on a global scale that have had to transition to so much more remote work. And one of the interesting things you realize, and I think it speaks to sort of the multifaceted aspects of technology that we're talking about today, is that of course you start with the technology itself. You know, what is it that people want to deploy? Is it Teams? Is it more cloud services? That is sort of a natural starting point. But then you immediately realize that you can't deploy that without fundamentally changing business processes, government processes. We've seen the Ministry of Justice in Italy take all of its trials online. We've seen so many companies take so many of their business processes, customer delivery processes online. And so we have to work hand in hand with them. We're not a company that can just say, here's the tech, good luck, let us know how it turns out. We work with them to then customize their solutions that work on top of our platform. And then there's one final aspect that I think has been so interesting. It's the old adage that you need a clear strategy, but ultimately culture eats strategy for breakfast. I think this has been illustrated really interestingly in our schools, including our public schools in the United States. I think they've struggled in many states. They don't have the connectivity for students at home. They don't have the devices. But even when they do all of that, you really realize you have to work with teachers. They need to learn not just how to use the technology, but to create a culture for a classroom when the students aren't in the room. And so it's not just a huge technology challenge, it's an enormous human challenge. And I think the great opportunity for us has been the ability to just stand next to our customers and sort of walk a mile in their shoes so that we can try to explore all of this together. That's been just an extraordinary opportunity for learning for us.
Are there particular efforts you have been most proud of with respect to this work?
Well, I think in the short run, this is a public health crisis. It's a public health crisis that has created a profound economic crisis. But I'd start with public health. I think one of the things that has emerged is that data has become the indispensable tool to address the public health aspects of this. Think about the decisions that governors are making in the United States. They've never impacted our life even remotely as much as they have in recent months. They're running the economy. They're deciding who can leave their house and who needs to stay home. But they are decisions that need to be based on data about the spread of the infection, data about hospital capacity, data about different counties in a state and the mortality that is being seen and the like. And so we've worked very closely with the counties and states in the United States, with national governments and with the World Health Organization to really transform the way they are collecting data, the way they're reporting it, the way they're sharing it with other leaders, the way they're sharing it with the public. So that has been just sort of one of the slices I've seen in the public health space. I think another really interesting example does come from the AI kinds of technologies that you all at MIT have been so involved in. It has been sort of a moment of real importance for conversational AI. We had developed an AI chatbot that was being deployed by a hospital here in Seattle. Well, it's now being deployed by over 1,500 institutions in 23 countries.
That's amazing.
And basically what it does is it allows an individual who may think they might need a COVID-19 test to go through a conversation that will begin to determine whether they in fact do. And if so, it can hand off the individual to a human via telehealth service. But in April, that was used 190 million times. So just think about that, that explosion. And that is, I think, a great manifestation of 2 years of digitization taking place in 2 months.
That's truly extraordinary. And now let me stay with COVID data for a minute and ask you, so I know you've said that you are skeptical about the use of contact tracing. And I'm just wondering what leads you to believe this is the case?
Well, first of all, contact tracing is of fundamental importance in the case of any communicable disease. Now, I will be quick to say, I say this as a person who on New Year's Eve could have written down perhaps everything I knew about public health on the back of a postage stamp. You know, this has been a crash course for all of us. But certainly what we learn from the present and from the past is that for over a century, whenever anybody has a disease that is spread in an infectious way, you know, they're interviewed by a public health officer, and basically part of the routine is, where have you been? Who did you see? And the public health officer then contacts, typically by phone or email, each of those individuals. That is a process that is fundamentally important. Now we're talking about deploying apps for that. I think that's a good thing. Don't get me wrong. I think that app-based contact tracing is an important tool. But I think we should recognize that it is a tool and not a panacea. It is, in my view, sort of a belt and suspender approach. We still will need public health officers to interview each individual who tests positive over the phone or in person, even if they've been using an app on their smartphone that has, say, something like Bluetooth-based contact data on it. Why? Well, the first reason is not everybody is going to walk around with an app on their phone. In Western Europe, in North America, it's very clear governments are not going to make this mandatory. Even in Singapore, where it's not mandatory, but they have exhorted the population to use this technology, they've struggled to get it above a 20% adoption rate. The second thing to just remember is, even if you could get everybody who has a phone to use the app, not everybody has a phone. Some of the most vulnerable people in this pandemic are homeless people. They're people who are elderly in nursing homes. So we just can't base our planning on the assumption that everyone will have this app. Finally, we need to recognize this is a smartphone we're talking about. It's not an ankle bracelet. People forget to take it with them to the grocery store. The battery dies. So I think it's an important tool. I think it's very valuable. I think it can make life easier, and it can make this whole approach to contact tracing more effective, but it won't replace the humans who need to do this contact tracing. And frankly, it won't replace the need for individuals who test positive still to go through a lengthy interview.
What about privacy with respect to contact tracing? Is that a concern?
Oh, I think it absolutely is. And I think it's an important thing for us to focus on. And I think it's the kind of thing that should call on us both narrowly and broadly to remember we need to address some new problems, but we don't need to throw what I would call timeless values out the window to do so. A few weeks ago, we published 7 privacy principles. And in some ways, I think some of them reflect the degree to which you can harmonize, say, the protection of privacy and the protection of public health. And then you can get to the issues there where there may be some real tension between them. But for example, if we are using this app and this data to protect public health, I don't think it's a stretch to say then the only proper use of the data is to protect public health. And I don't think it's a stretch to tell people that their data will not be retained beyond the point in time in which it's actually useful to protect public health. Those are 2 principles where I think we can actually advance both causes at the same time. There are other areas where there are certain tensions, but we believe these can mostly be reconciled, and we think we can do this in a way that, by and large, strongly upholds the protection of privacy, and I think that should be our goal.
So this is a great segue to talking about your book, Tools and Weapons, which I finished reading over the weekend, and I enjoyed it very much. The book read to me like an action-adventure book with geeks as the heroes. So thank you for that. So to me, the book summarizes your views on the roles companies should take in having a moral stance on how technology is viewed and used. And the book also includes some great historical context. I loved the backstories for events I remember, for instance, failing to track Daniel Pearl's kidnappers, successfully finding Charlie Hebdo attackers, and hearing about how your CEO Satya Nadella decided that the security patches for WannaCry should be broadly available to the public. And so my first question is, what inspired you to write this book, and what did you want to communicate to the public with it?
Well, first of all, thank you for reading it. I do find that when you do an event like this, it encourages people to finish it the weekend before we talk. So thank you. I love your description because I do think you're right. In our minds, geeks are the heroes of a lot of dramas that involve very important and human problems. Carol Ann Brown is my co-author. We worked together at Microsoft, and we really wrote the book to try to reach a broader audience, to bring these stories to life, to let people see how they have been addressed in practice, not just at Microsoft, but in many other places as well, to draw on some lessons from history. Because in our mind, the tool of the book really captures the challenge we think we face. Digital technology, I think, is the world's most powerful tool for so many huge problems, but it has become a formidable weapon as well. And so our ultimate goal is to broaden the conversation that we think the world needs to have about where technology is going, how it needs to be managed, and how it needs to actually build on the geeks who are the heroes, but now you recognize that we're at a point where these issues are of broad importance for everybody. You don't have to be a student at MIT. You don't need to have a PhD in computer science to have an important role to play. These issues affect all of us, and if nothing else, as consumers, as citizens, and as voters, we're at a point in time where I think we all benefit if everyone is better informed.
So let's dig a little bit deeper. In your book, you say that the two inflection points of this decade are Cambridge Analytica and Edward Snowden's revelations. Can you elaborate why, what makes these events so important in your mind?
Well, if you look back at the period from 2010 to 2020, I do think these were two inflection points. The Snowden disclosures happened in the summer of 2013. And what they did more than anything else, I think, is awaken the public, not just in the United States, but around the world, to the degree to which governments had access to so much data about each and every one of us. And it led to an effort to reform government surveillance and create more protection for people. One of the fascinating moments for me is a story we share in the book. It was being in the Roosevelt Room in the West Wing of the White House at a meeting in December of 2013 with President Obama, Vice President Biden, the White House senior staff, and 18 leading tech executives. And as each of us were pushing President Obama to reform government surveillance, there came this interesting moment when he looked around the table and he said, I just want you all to recognize you all have more data about people than the government does. And he said, I have a suspicion that the guns will turn. And there will be a moment when the demands that you're placing on the government will be placed on you as well. I thought it was a very insightful comment at the time. I wrote it down. I looked around and I was struck no one else was writing it down. And that moment came. It took 5 years, which would have been frankly longer than I predicted it at the time, but it took 2018 and it was Cambridge Analytica. I think for a variety of reasons that we describe in the book, that is the moment when then the public focused more on the amount of data that tech companies have on them. And it's really a watershed political moment in my view, because it started to unleash more scrutiny of tech companies, certainly in the United States, but equally important, perhaps even more important on a global basis.
So data bring us back to privacy considerations. You have a wonderful chapter in your book that presents privacy as a human right. And you start this chapter on privacy by describing your experience in Berlin when you visited the headquarters of Stasi. And for me, this was a very powerful moment of the book, since I was born in Romania during Stasi-like times. You also say that this was one of the most memorable moments of that year for you. How is this? How did this experience of visiting the Stasi headquarters impact your views on privacy as a human right?
Well, it really was a moving moment for me, for Carol Ann, and for others from Microsoft who were on this visit. In what was East Berlin, the former Stasi prison is now a museum. We had the opportunity to walk through the prison with an individual who was a prisoner there in 1968. He's a lot like a lot of us who are all connected here today. In 1968, he was 24 years old. His name is Hans-Jochen Scheidler. He was pursuing a graduate degree in physics at the time. He was studying at the University of Prague. And 1968 was the year of the Prague Spring. Well, he was back in Berlin when the Warsaw Pact tanks rolled through Prague to shut down the liberalization that was taking place there. He and three of his friends were very upset about this. So they printed up these little leaflets and they handed them out to people one evening. He was reported to the Stasi. They picked him up that night. They took him to this prison where for many, many months, he never saw another human being except for the individuals who were interrogating them. He was never given the opportunity to read anything. He was never given the opportunity to write. His parents had no idea what had happened to him. But when you think about what put him there in the first place, it was this extraordinary degree of surveillance that the Stasi had unleashed on the people of East Germany using all of the technology and hundreds of thousands of informants. And when you think about what he did, he wrote a few lines and he handed it out to people. Well, in our day, that's called sending a text message. It's called writing an email. And with cloud computing and online services, we now live in a world where if we're not careful, any government can use the power of technology to unleash surveillance on a scale that the Stasi could not have imagined. And you see what can happen when that kind of power is abused. And I think it's just really important for us to use that as inspiration. One of the most interesting moments for me was to share a short video that we produced. We had a camera crew with us on that visit. And we have an annual sales meeting at Microsoft. It's in the T-Mobile Arena in Las Vegas. You're speaking to 15,000 people. And as you can imagine, at a sales meeting, mostly it's, this was a great year, we're doing really well, everybody's so enthusiastic. And I showed that video, and I frankly worried. I was like, well, this is a bit of a downer. Is this going to land well? But I thought it was so important for our employees to see that through their own eyes. And I will frankly always remember not just the visit to the museum and the prison, but the standing ovation of all of our employees. To me, I think this is the message for everybody who's watching now. It is our time, and it is frankly going to be your generation that will decide how this technology impacts people's rights around the world. And I think we have to learn from the past and frankly just resolve together that we won't allow that kind of thing to be repeated.
Brad, that's so powerful to me. Let me follow up with a question on what do you see the role of technology and of the legal system to ensure privacy as a human right?
Well, I think two things need to go together. First, just as technology can be weaponized, as that last example showed, it is a powerful tool for the protection of human rights. We're using it, for example, with George and Amal Clooney. Amal Clooney is one of the great human rights lawyers in the world. And with the Clooney Foundation for Justice, we've created a cloud service and an app so that monitors can go into courtrooms around the world, courtrooms where journalists or women or people from the LGBT community are potentially being persecuted and then prosecuted in ways that put their rights at risk. And you can capture data, you can share it with the world, you can ensure that that trial is evaluated by judicial experts in other countries. All of that is happening. That's just one small example of all of the ways that technology can be used, I think, to promote the protection of human rights. But I do think at the end of the day, there is no substitute for protection under the law itself, protection by judges and courts. And so a lot of what we need to focus on is how technology and the law can advance together to meet these broad needs. That's really one of the other things that inspired us to write this book.
Yes, and technology and law need to understand each other's language and capabilities in order to make that path forward together. Now, a related issue to privacy is security. And you are instrumental in guiding Microsoft toward building a strong security foundation. And you decided that Microsoft needed to be the most secure company and held your ground on this, which was visionary and courageous, especially at a time when people did not really care about the privacy of their data and other companies were betting on advertising. I'm just wondering about the backstory. How did you decide on the importance of security?
Well, I think security became so fundamentally important beginning in about the year 2000. Software was designed for the personal computer, but no one envisioned that the personal computer would always be connected to the world. And so we recognized that that was going to take place. And we saw the attacks that started to take place. And so we started to harden computers, we started to harden network architecture and software. And what we really then learned was that we needed to keep pace. And we needed to rely not just on technology to protect people, but we were going to need to work with governments in new ways. We were going to need to work with the rest of the industry. We were going to need to advocate for stronger laws around the world. And so it was really that combination that I think led us to put ourselves on a journey. It's a journey that continues today. We continue to see nation states becoming more aggressive. And so we're having to figure out exactly what new initiatives we need to take. It's institutions at MIT that of course play an extraordinarily important role as well. We're all in this together and we're all focused on acting together.
Brad, with elections coming up this fall, a lot of states and counties are talking about the possibility of voting apps. What's your take on the security of electronic voting?
Well, I think the interesting thing is, in a world where we take for granted security for financial transactions every day, we're not yet in a world where we have security for elections and voting the way we would like. And so what I think we're going to need to do is look towards a future where we frankly can have online voting. Why not? But it is going to take time to be able to deploy it well. I think one of the things to just recognize is, we engage in financial transactions every moment of the day. There's billions every day. Voting happens infrequently. It's a powerful reminder that just in life, we get better at things that we do frequently than things that we do rarely. But I think we need to put ourselves on an ongoing quest to develop more secure online voting solutions. In the meantime, what we urgently need to do is secure the voting systems that exist today. In so many places in the United States, we have voting machines that are 10 or 15 years old. And so one of the really urgent needs, including for this election year, is to keep working typically with municipalities, with counties, with states, to harden their voting systems.
Now, you have a powerful chapter on AI and democracy in your book, and you also warn about a potential digital 9/11. What are you doing to prevent this? Meaning, what is Microsoft doing to prevent this?
Well, first of all, I would just say if you think about what a digital 9/11 would be, I think it's two things. One is it would be a government attacking, say, so that the electrical grid goes down, hospitals go down. That is what happened in 2017 with WannaCry, the National Health Service in the United Kingdom. A third of their hospitals went down. Cash registers, ATMs, everything stops working. That's what happened in Ukraine with the NotPetya attack. But ultimately, I think one of the worst attacks could be if we learned a week after an election that voting had been tampered with, that the voting rolls had been tampered with. I think if something like that were to happen, then I think we'd have a real issue. Just think what it would mean if no one had confidence to know who had been elected president. That would be a fundamental problem. Our entire basis for society, I think, would be put at risk.
I couldn't agree with you more. And I'm so glad that Microsoft and many other organizations and researchers, including a lot of researchers at MIT, are working on the challenge of security. I'd like to turn over to a different topic, and that is regulation. And I was very intrigued because in your book, you make an argument that I think is a bit rare among executives of major tech companies, and that is that Silicon Valley needs more regulation. And so I wonder, can we get specific? In what particular areas do you think companies like Microsoft need more regulation?
Well, first of all, I think we should recognize broadly that a well-functioning market typically has room for lots of innovation, lots of room for entrepreneurship, but a layer of regulation. We have more confidence in the safety of food and drugs because of the FDA. We have more confidence in the safety of our cars and aircraft because of regulatory authorities. So when you put things in that lens, I do believe that digital technology has reached a point where it would benefit from more regulation. Not the kind of regulation that would stifle creativity, but I do think to protect privacy, I think to protect security, I think to ensure the responsible use of artificial intelligence. That's why we've called for regulation of facial recognition technology. We now have the first example of that, a state law passed in Washington state, I think not coincidentally where Microsoft is based. So we have all of that to learn from. I think digital safety, the protection of children, that's another obvious area. All of these, I think, are ripe for regulation, and that's why we're seeing more regulation in it. I will say, you're going to get a kick out of this. Microsoft is so good at protecting security that my company's policies are telling me that they're going to reboot my computer in 7 minutes. So while I'm listening to you, I am trying to find a way to disable that, which I may or may not find in the next 7 minutes. So this will be one of the more memorable security updates in my life if this in fact happens. So let's see what we can cover.
I hope not. I have not gotten to many of the 200 plus questions, but let me ask you something about China. So Microsoft has had a direct presence in China for a long time. Your R&D initiatives there are significant. Can you tell us a bit about your experience there and how the current and foreseeable political disputes between US and China are affecting you, if at all?
Yeah, no, they definitely are. I think they're affecting all of us. I think it really has a three-part impact. First, it's having an impact on supply chain stability. I think there are real questions for the future as to the degree to which American tech companies will be able to rely on a Chinese supply chain for hardware. Second, it's having an impact on access to the Chinese market. I think the Chinese market has really provided only limited access to most American tech companies. And that doesn't look like it's going to change. In fact, I think it may get harder rather than easier. And finally, I actually think the single most important thing for us to think about, the thing that's most important for Microsoft, I would argue for MIT, it's the intellectual interaction. You know, China, as we all know, has some of the world's greatest engineers, software developers, academics. You know, software is not created in only a single country, especially with open source techniques and the like. It's created by people working together. And even if supply chains change, even if access to the market is limited, I think it's of profound importance to the world that people be able to learn and study and research and think together. And I think preserving that amid these other challenges is really an important priority for all of us.
What about the digital iron curtain? You talk in the chapter about China about the possibility of a digital iron curtain. We've also heard former Google CEO Eric Schmidt talk about splintering the internet in two, one Chinese-led and one non-Chinese-led. What would be the geopolitical and economic impact of the splintering, and how do you see the creation of this digital iron curtain?
Well, I think the world has been splintering since 2010. You know, the internet in China is not the same as the internet in the United States. But I think what we now see more and more is obviously a degree of technology competition between the United States and China. We see public policies in both countries focused on this competition. I think, you know, increasingly American companies have an advantage in the United States. Chinese companies have an advantage in China. They compete with each other in Europe and elsewhere. You know, we'll see. You know, it is increasingly a bipolar technology world. That's the phrase we use in our book. This will be, I think, one of the defining issues for this decade. And a lot remains unknown about how exactly this is going to unfold.
We've talked about a lot of challenges. There is one big challenge that is impacting everyone, and that is climate change. I personally believe that our only way out of this big challenge is to figure out how to cool the planet by 1 degree rather than figuring out how to not warm up by more than another 1.5 degrees. And I was inspired when earlier this year, Microsoft announced ambitious plans to go carbon negative by 2030. Not only that, but also to turn back the clock on all the carbon Microsoft has produced since 1975 by counterbalancing that number by 2050. What do you see as the biggest challenge as you proceed with this objective?
Well, we're going to, first of all, need a broad public understanding and commitment to the goal. I think the goal needs to get to be carbon zero, meaning net zero, by 2050, meaning as a planet we're removing every year as much carbon as we emit. Now, to do that, then two things become obvious. We need to emit less carbon and we need to remove more. We need a number of techniques to emit less carbon. Digital technology plays a powerful role in our ability to measure this, to create standards, ultimately to reinforce this through private action and I think public regulation in a way that will drive emissions down. But I think we also need a massive investment, perhaps the biggest R&D challenge of the century, to develop new techniques to remove carbon from the environment. Things like direct air capture are so clearly in their infancy. They're not yet cost effective. And we're going to need just huge breakthroughs in that space over the next 3 decades if we are going to achieve this fundamental goal of protecting the planet the way we need to.
And we have a tragedy of the commons here. Many more companies have to step up and follow Microsoft's lead on this because everyone needs to pitch in, otherwise we won't get there.
No, we do. And I'm just going to say now, in case you lose me in 1 minute, thank you for the 45 minutes rather than the hour. But let's hope that I keep going with my update. Put off a few minutes.
I'd like to switch to some questions by
go for it.
students.
The ultimate speed round.
Okay, so here's one. How can workers proactively expand on their skills to adapt to the increasingly digital AI-driven environment?
Well, I would say two things. People who are not in the computer and data science field need to master more digital skills. But my plea to all of you, because I think so many of you probably are more in the computer and data fields, is don't neglect the other aspects of the liberal arts. Make sure that you're in a position to not only help drive technology forward, but to think more broadly about the use cases, the fundamental societal problems you can help solve, the ethical, almost the philosophical issues, the policy issues, the legal issues that will also need to be addressed in order to advance technology in a way that genuinely is going to best serve the world. I think only if we're able to think in a more multidisciplinary framework than we have in the past are we going to be successful in ensuring that technology serves the public in the way it really broadly needs to do.
This is definitely the spirit of MIT's College of Computing. Okay, next question. Does Microsoft have plans to allow people to work from home permanently, like Twitter recently announced? Okay, I wonder if we should wait for a minute to see if Brad can rejoin us. Otherwise, I hope you've enjoyed the conversation. I certainly have learned so much from Brad's wisdom. I encourage all of you to read his book. It's really a tour de force through many ethical challenges that we as a community face around the use of technology. So let's see. There's some questions posted on Q&A, and I am going to wait for just a minute to see if anybody is. Oh, look, Brad is back. Excellent. We are so excited to see you back, Brad.
I just hope I can stay. Okay.
Oh, I asked you a question that made you run away.
There's a lot of benefits from working at home, but having your own home computer managed by your company may be one or not. You know, it definitely keeps it more secure, but it adds this level of unpredictability. Let me just say, at Microsoft, you know, we've first told people, hey, you feel comfortable working from home through October until the beginning of November. I think your real question is, what does the future look like when COVID-19 is a memory? I think we'll have more people working from home. I still think we're going to have offices. You know, Satya Nadella, our CEO, I think put it really well in a conversation he had yesterday. He said, let's not replace one dogma with another. The old dogma was everybody needs to be in the office. Let's not create a new dogma that says no one should ever see each other in person. We can all do things through these screens. I think that what we're going to find is more choices for more people. We'll see the technology continue to advance. Certainly, we're working to accelerate the pace of innovation for our products like Teams. But I do think that at the end of the day, there is something important about seeing each other in person. There's these conversations that happen before a meeting begins, after a class ends. I think there are still important things that happen when people sit down and have lunch together. So we should keep all of that in mind. I think we're going to live in a world that has more of what we call remote everything. There will be more remote digital services. But I think our ultimate goal should be to bring out the best of what that offers and the best of what we as human beings get by being able to spend time together in person.
So the next question is how you envision the world in the next 10 to 20 years. You touched upon how we're going to work post-COVID. What about living and playing and learning?
Well, yeah, in addition to working at Microsoft every day, I'm on the board of Netflix, so I get to see things from that perspective as well. And let's face it, this isn't just something of the last couple of months where we're all relying on remote entertainment. But we've been seeing this change over the course of a number of years. Clearly the use of digital technology is going to be one of the defining trends of the 2020s, as it really was for the 2010s. But what I would say is that while it has so much potential to bring improvements to people's lives, we also do need to think hard about the inequalities that technology can create. Income inequality has become one of the really important issues in the United States and many other countries. And digital technology, to some degree, has exacerbated that, in part because we're seeing tech companies do so well, in all honesty. Businesses that are not grounded in technology have had a harder time. But I think it is broader than that. I think we live in a world with internet inequality. You see this very sharply when you see the tens of millions of Americans that don't have access to broadband. I think we live in a world of educational inequality. And digital skills and the heightened need for digital skills is shining a spotlight on that. I think we live in a world where digital technology can do so much, but it can exacerbate the inequalities, for example, that people with disabilities may confront, especially if we don't do a great job of designing technology to meet their needs. So I think that these inequalities of the world will be one of the important issues of this decade. They're all going to be more pronounced because of this extraordinary recession, if not depression, emerging from COVID-19. And I think for all of us who aspire to have geeks as the heroes, as you said, I think we need geeks to be heroes, and we need teachers to be heroes, and we need public officials to be heroes, because if we're not careful, these advances in technology will make the inequalities greater rather than smaller.
So let me try to get a few more audience questions in. What do you see as the role of Microsoft in the open source community?
Well, one of the more interesting few pages in our book, I would say, certainly for those of us who were involved in experiencing it, and for Carol Ann and I when we wrote about it, is we acknowledge very directly that Microsoft, as they say in the book, was on the wrong side of history when open source really exploded at the beginning of this century. And I can say that not just about Microsoft, I can say it about me personally. The good news is if life is long enough and you're successful in other areas, you can be on the wrong side of history and learn that you're there and you need to change. And that's what we did. Today, Microsoft is the single largest contributor to open source projects in the world, at least when it comes to businesses. And we're very proud of that. When we look at GitHub, we see GitHub as the home for open source development. And we have a responsibility as a steward to make it a great and secure and productive home for the world's open source developers. So we're much more now in the open source camp than outside it, even if not every piece of code that we write is developed as part of an open source project. I think in some ways, one of the other really interesting questions for all of us is how do we learn from open source and apply that learning to what we now refer to as open data? We launched just a few weeks ago what we're calling an open data campaign, a global effort that we think really needs to be focused on ensuring that more data sets, perhaps especially data sets that relate to great societal issues, are opened up. So we've created 5 principles that we're applying to ourselves and the data that we have. We're investing in more work with nonprofits. We're promoting public policy. Ultimately, I think the great need in the world is to ensure that those that have smaller data sets, whether they be companies, small businesses, universities, or the like, have the opportunity to scale by federating their data with data sets held by other institutions. But there is a clear need to do so with the kinds of platform and tools that a company like Microsoft creates. It is an imperative to protect privacy. We're very enthused about new techniques like differential privacy and where we see that technology going. There needs to be the recognition that people need to be able to share data without surrendering their ownership or control of it. There's a lot here that is very broad, and I think this is another area that's really ripe for progress at a place like MIT.
Okay, so if you were a student today, what would be your major?
You know, I majored, as I said, I'm the liberal arts side of liberal arts meets engineering at Microsoft. I like to quote Steve Jobs, who said that he worked every day at the intersection between engineering and the liberal arts. It is a way of reminding us all that, in fact, we need the kind of multidisciplinary approach that I was talking about before. I majored in international relations at Princeton. I'd probably major again if I could in history. I've just found it remarkably helpful for somebody who does the work that I do to be able to learn from the past. One of the interesting things about history is that ultimately there's sort of the history of everything, including the history of science, the history of technology. I definitely would not be the kind of student that would study only one thing. One of the great things you realize later on in life is that when you're in a university, it's an enormous opportunity to study lots of other things. And so that's what I would encourage people to do.
Brad, there is a lot of uncertainty in the world right now, and a lot of reasons people feel anxious. On the flip side, I'm just curious, what motivates you? What makes your clock tick and get up and open the day with an exciting outlook every morning?
Well, look, this is a hard time. Let's just recognize the obvious. Even for those of us who have the great good fortune to have jobs, to not be among the 36 million Americans who have filed for unemployment claims in the last 3 months, to be among the people who are healthy, this is a challenging time. But I also think that because of the challenging times that we confront, the truth is the world has never needed digital technology to do as much as it needs it to do right now. And even when COVID-19 is a memory, it will become a memory. We're not going to be talking about COVID-19 in 2030 as much as we'll be talking about carbon, I suspect. The world will need the kind of technology we can create. And when I say we, I don't mean we at Microsoft. I mean all of us who are having this conversation. I mean all of you who are getting a degree at MIT right now. This is the future that you're going to create. And you have a bigger opportunity, I think, to have a more important and more positive impact in the world than perhaps any generation that has ever studied at MIT has had before, because digital technology is just ubiquitous in the world. And the opportunity to ensure that it not only works well, but it does good for the world, oh my gosh, how can you not be excited about getting up in the morning? That's sort of what I feel. I just am frankly so happy I've had the opportunity to work with great scientists and engineers on technology that matters. And I really hope that all of you will as well. It's something that should inspire all of us, I believe.
Well, this is fantastic advice for our students. Thank you for that. If you go back 40 years in hindsight, what advice from a global leader would have been most useful for you at that time?
I've worked with Bill Gates, Steve Ballmer, Satya Nadella. I've had the opportunity to meet a lot of great world leaders, in my job. The one thing that I find truly successful people have in common is enormous curiosity. And I think it's something that if you're at a place like MIT, you probably have already. But the advice I would give is, it's like a muscle. Exercise it, use it, push yourself to read more, listen more, learn more in more fields. Start with what is at the core of what is your major or focus in graduate education, but keep adding to that. And what you'll find, I think, is two things. One is there are more dots that you can connect than you can ever would have imagined. More things relate to each other as you broaden the aperture. But the second thing is life is just more fun when you ask people questions. It's a lot more interesting when you get to learn from other people and develop that sense of curiosity. It's not only something that will make you more successful, I think it'll make your life more enjoyable. And I benefited from a lot of similar advice. So yeah, I think I heard some of that when I was a student. But if I could go back in time, I would write a little note to myself and I'd probably read it every morning.
Well, I'm inspired, and unfortunately we are at the top of the hour with you, and we will have to save the other questions for the future. So I would like to take this opportunity to thank you for sharing your wisdom and insights with us, and also give you an open invitation to come back for an in-person visit to our campus when we are open for business again.
I look forward to being there in person. I always enjoy my visits. It's great to connect digitally, but it's even more fun to be there in person. So thank you.
Thank you, Brad, for joining us today. And thank you, Daniela, for moderating this truly fascinating and really deeply informative conversation, which I knew it would be in advance, but it's great to see it actually realized. And in fact, even the little temporary gap in the middle, at least for me, it gave me a little bit of time to catch up, because just this constant sort of pacing of questions and answers, I needed a little processing time. So it just, thank you so much. Really fantastic. Just one housekeeping.
While you were catching up, I was panicking.
I know, I'm sure. But it was, it was a good little interlude for the audience.
Thank you.
With 2020 hindsight.
Just remember, Microsoft, we make software secure.
Yep. Well, but this is the world. If we're going to be more secure, if security isn't first, it never happens. So it's actually a good lesson.
That's right.
We always put it off otherwise. But just one housekeeping thing, we'll be posting a video of today's event on both the CSAIL and the College of Computing websites once we have the time to get it closed captioned. So thank you all, everybody, especially in these times, take care and be well. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.